just engage in a conversation for a little while.
We're just going to nerd out on election law. This is going to be so great.
Exactly. And Ellen Weintraub is the chair. As I mentioned, this is sort of a long, I probably not expected to be this long service on the FEC. She previously served as chair back in 2003 originally. There are terms which are not, in fact, 16 plus years long, but she has served on the FEC since 2002 and has served really for quite a long time. We're going to get to sort of how you got there. She actually went to Yale College and Harvard Law School. She's a member of the bar in D.C. and New York. She practiced in private practice, worked in government, and then was appointed again at the end of 2002 to the Federal Election Commission. Her service there is really the length is extraordinary. We'll talk about how that has happened.
I'm not even in the top 5.
Right, and that's another question. The other thing which is fun is that in her role, I think that Chair Weintraub has been certainly very clear and outspoken about her views of how our system, how law and democracy should work, which gets, we'll get into specifics of what people say about that, not a shrinking violet, including, if you pull up her Wikipedia entry, I thought I was going to have some fun looking at this. My favorite part of my various research, again, having known her for a while, is that the Wikipedia entry starts out saying deep state operative.
Oh my goodness.
So I did not know that. So
darn it, me neither.
And now, I don't know if that's been changed. That was like 24 hours ago, so it could have changed. Yeah, I printed
Oh, for
out
crying
here.
out loud. See, I never look at Wikipedia. This is why.
Right. I just thought, it's like...
Oh, this is awful.
So I thought, I will, having known you for a long time, I will personally testify that you are not a deep state operative.
It gets worse. Deep state operative and political hack.
Right, that was my next line.
Do I have no friends on Wikipedia anymore?
Well, we're going to work on that. And I will testify that was my second point, that but somehow people, a position of being in the Federal Election Commission, what's interesting about that is that these are things which often go unnoticed, and so apparently people are noticing the work that you are doing. So that's a lot of introduction, but I do want to just get into some questions about, if I may start talking about just a little bit about what the FEC is for us and how you got engaged, and then we've got a lot of very current topics to discuss.
Very current.
So I guess the first question is how, what is the FEC and how did you, what was your path to becoming commissioner in the first place?
Okay. So the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, was set up after Watergate to follow the money. We don't count ballots and we don't register voters and we don't count votes, but we do follow all the money that is raised and spent, other than the dark money, which we can't follow. We post it all on the website. The candidates and party committees and super PACs and other PACs all have to report to us what they are raising and what they are spending to influence federal elections. And we post that on our website and make it available to the public. The Supreme Court says that it is critical to an informed electorate that people know where the money is coming from that is supporting our candidates. And I heartily agree with that. I don't heartily agree with a lot of the Supreme Court jurisprudence on campaign finance, but they've been very strong on disclosure, and I appreciate that. How I got to the FEC. Do you want the short version or the long version?
Medium version.
Medium version. Medium version. I'm a lawyer. I was in private practice. I'm trying to assess what the ratio of students to faculty here is, because I have a good story for students.
Okay. It's more students here than staff or faculty.
All right. So it's a little bit of a longer story, but I think it's well. I don't know how inspiring it is, but I think it's an interesting story. I went to law school to go into public service, and yet I ended up at a law firm straight out of law school because, it kind of channels you in that direction. Moved to DC because my husband was interested in working on the Hill, and it became clear very quickly that he was having a lot more fun than I was working on the Hill. He working on the Hill and me working in private practice. But the other thing that was going on in my life is that I was 2 years out of law school, had the house, had the baby, had the husband and the job, and I thought I was on top of the world and had it all. And then my son was diagnosed with what we later learned was autism. At the time, it wasn't as prevalent, so it took a while to figure out exactly what was going on. My father developed cancer. My husband and I decided to have more children, and I had a miscarriage. And it was the worst year of my life. And at the low point in my professional career and in my life in general, I was working at a law firm that really was mostly interested in how many hours I was billing that week. And I got to tell you, my hours were not very high that year. So I found myself at the end of the year looking for another job. And at that moment in time, the House Ethics Committee was looking for staff in order to explain to the members what they had just did to themselves by passing the Ethics Reform Act of 1989. So now I'm dating myself. So I had actually talked to a headhunter, and she said, what area of the law are you interested in? And I said, I've done a little work in ethics, and I think it's really interesting. And she said, you can't find a job in ethics. So my next job was as counsel to the House Ethics Committee. So first lesson there, don't let anybody tell you that you cannot do what you really want to do. If somebody says that there's no pathway for that, try to be a little creative and look around, and you might find a pathway. Second lesson is that at the low point in my life, because I happened to be looking for a job right then, I lucked into this opportunity at the House Ethics Committee, which launched me on a career path, which ended up with my current position at the FEC. So, at this point in your lives, you may think that everything's going to be shiny and bright, but sometimes, I'm on camera, so let me clean up what I usually say here. Sometimes bad stuff happens, and you have to be able to roll with the punches and put your head down and grit your way through it, because if you're at a low point, that doesn't mean that you're going to stay there forever. You can find a path forward, and in my case, the path that I found was one that was extraordinarily satisfying and gratifying to me. I was at and by the way, my son, who's now 32 years old, it's been quite not what I expected when I first got pregnant, but it's been an amazing experience raising him. And if you've got a special needs kid, having a law degree and a big mouth actually is pretty good. It's a pretty good criteria right there. And my father was treated for his cancer and lived another 10 years, and my husband and I subsequently had 2 healthy daughters who are fabulous human beings. And as I said, I was launched on this great career path. I spent 6 years at the Ethics Committee, and then went back out into private practice, where my law firm represented, I was now in this political law world. My law firm represented a lot of politicians. If you want an appointed position in politics, it really helps to know the people who are in a position to make those appointments. And we represented, among other people, Tom Daschle, who was then the Senate Majority Leader. The way FEC commissioners usually get picked is the president picks the commissioners from his or her own party, and then the leader in the Senate of the opposition party usually picks the people to recommend to the president for the other seats. So I was recommended by Senator Daschle to then President George W. Bush, and that's how I got appointed to the FEC.
And just to stay on that, just to continue for the tradition, and I know we're at a point of gridlock, we'll get to that as well. But explain the tradition of how the FEC has started, the balance of commissioners party-wise, and the deal that has been until recently.
So by law, no more than 3 of the 6 commissioners can be of one political party, and it takes 4 commissioners to make any significant decision at the FEC. To initiate investigations, to resolve investigations and conclude enforcement matters, to issue advisory opinions, to issue regulations. So all of that requires 4 votes, and it has to be bipartisan because no more than 3 can be of any one political party. The concern at the beginning was that the agency would immediately fail because the Democrats would protect Democrats and the Republicans would protect Republicans and nothing would ever get done. Surprisingly, that didn't actually happen for most of the agency's history. For most of the agency's history, they figured out pretty quickly that if you wanted the folks on the other side to get penalized when they broke the law, you're going to have to be willing to go after your own when they broke the law. And so I can't say that it was a perfect system, and surely there were times when people tried to lower the penalty or drop out certain counts in a complaint, but for the most part, the agency kind of worked until 2008, when we also were lacking a quorum of commissioners, as we are right now. We were down to 2 because there was a particularly controversial nominee on one side, and then the partisans on that side said, well, we're not going to vote for your guys if you're not going to vote for our guy. And for 6 months, we had no quorum. And then when they reappointed commissioners, the entire Republican side turned over all at once, which had never happened before, that entire slate. So there's nobody on that side of the table that had any fidelity to any decision that had been made before on the commission. It was supposed to be 2 on, 2 off every 2 years so that there would be some sense of continuity, and we lost that. It was broken. And the commissioners who were appointed, it was sort of a canary in the coal mine situation where it was a precursor to some of the growing polarization in Washington. So they were further, and I don't think they would dispute this characterization, they were further out on the spectrum of ideology in terms of their views on campaign finance. So whereas before, maybe I and my colleagues were over here and the Republicans were over there, and we would look for 4 commissioners in the middle somewhere to make decisions. Now we were still over here, the Republicans were somewhere over there, and they were willing to come this far maybe in order to make a compromise, and I can't get that far. It's too far away from where I am in order for me to find that to be a comfortable landing place, and they all voted together all the time. So there was no more finding 4 people in the middle. You had to get all of them or you couldn't get any of them. And you're probably negotiating with the person who was most adamant and furthest to the extreme view of whatever issue it was, which made it, again, harder to form compromises. So we have, for the last 11 years, been in a situation where on most important issues, we break down on party lines, but not the way people originally anticipated. So because they are very deregulatory and skeptical of campaign finance regulation in general, what happens is we get an enforcement case and the Democrats vote to investigate and the Republicans vote not to. And it doesn't matter who the respondent is. So we recently had a case that just went public involving a $9 million alleged coordination scheme between a big super PAC and the Hillary Clinton campaign, and the Democrats voted to investigate and the Republicans blocked it. So it's just a very deregulatory libertarian approach on the other side that makes it very difficult for me, as somebody who believes in enforcing the law, to find a path forward.
So that's interesting. You're saying that some of your colleagues have been committed to deregulation, but they're working for the regulatory body.
Yes.
And so that creates a different set of challenges from previous.
Yes.
And so now you've got a situation where Commissioner Peterson just stepped down. And so where does that put the FEC at this moment in terms of its ability to do its work?
Well, it's a tough place because over 2 years ago, a Democratic commissioner left and was not replaced. About a year and a half ago, a Republican commissioner left and was not replaced. And now a second Republican commissioner has left as of the end of August. So now we're down to 3. And it was hard enough to get anything done with 4 because then we all had to be on board. We had to be unanimous to get anything done. But with 3, as I said, we can't launch investigations, we can't conclude any enforcement matters, we can't issue any advisory opinions, and we can't issue any regulations. The agency staff is still there, the lights are still on, disclosure reports are still flowing in, and staff are questioning people who they think haven't filled out the forms properly, and we're getting amendments to the form, and we post all that information on the website. So the good news is that as we go into the 2020 election, we will still have the benefit of the information that we are supposed to collect. Most people try to comply with the law, so they continue to file the reports, despite the fact that we don't have a quorum of commissioners who could actually ding them if they didn't. But obviously, we are severely handicapped in getting our work done.
So if I am a candidate for election for a federal office right now, and I don't file my reports, my finance reports, what's going to happen?
Well, you get a request for additional information from our analysts. You'll get a series of letters saying, file those reports. But ultimately, if a complaint is filed, there's really nothing we can do about it at this point. Investigations that were started before we lost the quorum are ongoing, but we can't start any new ones.
All right, so we are sort of talking about, I guess, your path here. We're talking about the way the FEC works, and I guess we're here to talk about election 2020. You recently have Chair Weintraub has a significant Twitter presence, I
was tweeting in the car on the way over here.
Yeah, I hope you're saying coming to the best law school in the history of the world.
That isn't actually exactly what I was.
But that was the meaning behind it.
Yes, it absolutely
this is
was.
interpretation. This is statutory interpretation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So on your way, you're thinking about what's your next 57 consecutive tweets, because Chair Weintraub I believe it's 57, right?
57.
Tweeted about the role of foreign entities in U.S. elections. So I guess this is a multi-part question, which...
Does it have 57 parts?
I'll work on that. I could do that. Don't challenge me. It could happen. I think, some of my students are, I think, Sam, you're going to pass out there? Sam's thinking about his time in my class. So a couple of things. First of all, the first two I'll throw out. One is, why are you tweeting out 57 tweets to put out a memo? So what is because there's a procedural, it's not just that you were sitting there thinking like, how can I write 57 tweets?
Right.
There's a procedural thing. This is sort of the admin law side of this. But then let's start thinking about, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about the substance of what's in there, which, again, I've been reading. I'll send out assignments to everybody else, but I've been reading your memos, so.
Thank you.
So we'd love to get into that substance. So start with the why you would actually put information out in this manner.
All right, so in the absence of a quorum, I think I have to be a little bit creative about how I do my job, which I think includes a strong component of informing the public about what the law is. We are at a moment right now where in the course of my career, I don't think campaign finance law has ever been so important to the national debate. And it has ever been so important for us as commissioners to try and make sure that everybody knows what the state of the law is. So I will use any tool that is available to me, including Twitter, to try and explain the law to people. And what happened in this case was, so back right before we lost the quorum, in the scramble of the last 5 days, because I had only 5 days notice that we were about to lose the quorum, I was trying to engage my colleagues in an effort to put out an interpretive rule on the meaning of the foreign national ban and on political spending and how the FEC has interpreted it over the years. I thought it would be really useful, and they actually were engaging with me on it, but we couldn't. 5 days was not enough to get that done. But in the meantime, I had asked the staff to prepare a memo that would summarize the state of the law as commissioners understood it at the time we lost the quorum. And so I had that document in hand as a proposed interpretive rule. And as the weeks went on without a quorum, I became increasingly frustrated that I could not do what I had wanted to do, which was to put this out there as an agenda item on a meeting where we could have discussed it in the public arena and potentially adopted it as a formal interpretive rule. The document actually, as I said, is really just a summary prepared by our professional staff what the commission has done to date on this issue. And I thought it was actually pretty important to get it out there. So even though I knew that we wouldn't be able to adopt it, I thought, let me put this out there. I will put it out as an agenda item on the next meeting that we can discuss it at, whenever that will be. I mean, I believe that at some point we will have 4 commissioners again, and we will be able to meet and discuss these things. And in fact, the last time we were without a quorum, the 2 of us that were there actually did hold meetings where we discussed issues, even knowing that we couldn't issue conclusive determinations on anything. We thought that our views would be informative to the public, to know, okay, so there's only 2 commissioners, here's what we think about this legal issue that somebody has asked about. So I felt that it was, completely within my prerogative to put this document out there, put it on the agenda for whenever we next will meet. And at the end of every week, on every Friday, we put out a weekly digest of all of the things that the commission does during the week, and includes any statements that commissioners have put out that week. It's not a very exciting document, I got to tell you, our weekly digest.
Exciting to some of us.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. It doesn't have a huge readership, I have to say, but I thought it was standard. It would, as I said, it's just standard to put in commissioner statements. But we have a press committee that is comprised right now of me and my Republican colleague that has to approve the issuance of the digest every week, and she objected to my putting my statement in the digest, and objected to the digest going out with my statement in it. Said, well, on what basis are you objecting? And I didn't get an answer on Friday. And I thought, well, how can I get this out? So I decided to tweet out the digest with my document in it, which took 57 tweets, and that actually got a whole lot more attention than the digest would have gotten had she just let me put it out the way I wanted to. On Tuesday of this week, she wrote up a statement and agreed to put out the digest as long as it had both of our statements in it. Okay, fine. But she still didn't have any right to stop me from putting out my statement last week. So it was retweeted by Rachel Maddow, Soledad O'Brien. People have a lot bigger Twitter followings than I do, I got to say. Deborah Messing, Judd Apatow. Who knew he cared about campaign finance? So it kind of, was buzzing around the Twitter sphere.
Viral.
It did. Well, as viral as it's not Kardashian viral, but it was as viral as a campaign finance tweet probably can get.
That's a lot.
So, using the tools in my toolbox, I got to do what I can to get the message out.
So I have that here. Again, my own really enjoyable reading. What is, I guess, a couple of things. This is about the participation of foreign nationals, foreign entities in U.S. elections. So if you could, I guess, next couple of parts in this, want to just talk a little bit about the limitations that are in the law and as they have been interpreted. And truly, this is, for those of you who are interested in election law, this really is an excellent summary of where things have been. But then, I want to then start to carry it forward to the current questions of the day, like literally of the day, for how that may the rules from the past will how they may apply currently, and that's not, and obviously there are things you may not feel like you can answer right now, and so I would say start with just saying about what do you think about the basic substance of foreign engagement in U.S. elections.
Well, it's illegal. Short answer is it is illegal, has been for quite a long time, for anyone to solicit, accept, or receive anything of value from a foreign national in connection with any U.S. election, state, federal, or local. It is the one area where the FEC has jurisdiction over state and local elections. Normally, we're just in the federal sphere. And it is the broadest prohibition that is in the statute. This in connection with language is broader than the usual phrase that comes up in campaign finance law for the purpose of influencing an election. In connection with is broader than that. And that has been the law, as I said, for quite some time, and the Commission has interpreted it over the years. And by the way, this document is not my view of the law. It's not the way I would interpret the law if I were queen of the world and I could write it. You can tell that it was put together by lawyers in the process of, and reflects a process of compromise amongst commissioners, because there's a lot of long, awkward sentences that have a lot of subclauses in them. But only, and in this case, it's not the way I normally write. But the short answer is that it's illegal to accept foreign assistance, and that includes anything of value. You can pay for things. So the example that I've used before is if Samsung sells phones to a campaign, that's perfectly legal. If Samsung gives phones to a campaign, that is illegal. And it covers things as well as cash. And a thing of value can be information. It can be opposition research, mailing lists, polling data. All of these things have been considered in the past. They are things that are valued and people pay for. Campaigns do pay for these things. And the Supreme Court has looked at the issue of foreign nationals in the Blumen case, which is the leading case. And that involved a Canadian citizen who wanted to spend $300, make 3 separate $100 contributions, and print up a bunch of flyers to hand out in Central Park. So the value can be fairly nominal. And in some cases, you don't even have to know what the value is. You just have to know that it is a thing of value in order for it to be illegal. And the courts, and the Blumen decision was summarily affirmed by the Supreme Court, but the decision from the D.C. Circuit was written by then Judge Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh, no friend to campaign finance regulation in general, by the way, but when he looked at this issue of whether foreign nationals can participate in our politics, he said, we're not going to view this through the normal lens of campaign finance law, which might indicate that we don't want to discriminate against anybody on the basis of who they are in terms of whether they can participate. When it comes to foreign national participation, it's a question of the definition of our national politics and our political identity. Who gets to participate in our political choices? And the answer that Congress has come up with is U.S. citizens get to do that, not foreign nationals. And even at very low dollar values. Nobody said in the course of this litigation, well, it's only $300, so it's not worth talking about. Even at that low dollar value and the price of some copies at Kinko's, it was still something that was worthy of court attention and worthy of clarifying that even that was illegal.
Okay, and so that was something where you can say there's a dollar amount. You were saying also, though, that it does not have to have a dollar amount, the $300 in this context. What would be examples of things which are things of value which might not have a dollar value in that kind of thing?
Well, as I said, opposition research, mailing lists, polling data, it might be hard to figure out exactly what the precise dollar value is, but they are still things that have value.
And so also, reading your memo, the memo that summarizes law. So we're talking about individuals and organizations, foreign individuals and organizations giving, but also there's a prohibition on soliciting and accepting. So can you explain that?
Well, I think it's actually, pretty clear in the words of the statute. You can't ask for it. You can't ask for a thing of value from a foreign national in connection with a U.S. election.
Okay, so now getting to today. And look, there's a lot we're still going to see. A lot's developing. But I guess the question would be, can a candidate ask a foreign country, a leader of a foreign country, for, you were just mentioning opposition research. Would you say that's within or outside of the rules?
I'm just going to repeat the law. It is illegal for anyone to solicit accept or receive a thing of value from a foreign national in connection with a U.S. election. I don't think I should get more concrete than that.
That's fair. That is fair. I know that these are things which may come to you. They may present themselves. So then I guess I would, before pressing you more on that, which I may come back around to that, but there's limits. Right now, as we look ahead at the elections, what do you think are the biggest challenges for, certainly for the FEC, but also the biggest challenges in the upcoming federal election cycle in 2020?
Well, I'm deeply concerned, actually, about a lot of things, but I would say top on my list is what our intelligence community has already warned us about, that, we saw foreign interference in 2016, and they fully anticipate we're going to see new efforts in 2020. We saw it from the Russians before. We will likely see it from the Russians again, but likely from other countries also. There are a variety of bills in Congress right now, but I think perhaps for me the most important one would be the one that would impose strong sanctions on foreign governments that attempted to intervene in our elections. I think we really need to make it clear. It's very hard to catch this stuff. We need to make it clear that there will be penalties. We need to tell people, this is the United States of America. We will not tolerate anyone messing with our elections from outside. We're not going to put up with outside interference, and there will be hell to pay if somebody tries it. That is the message that we should be sending out. There are bills in Congress that would send that message, and I think they passed the House and are bottled up in the Senate, and I really hope that Congress will pass them. I'm also really concerned about disinformation. Had an event at the FEC just a couple of weeks ago on this topic. That could be coming from external as well as internal sources. I think one of the things we saw last time was foreigners posing as U.S. citizens, or in order to get their message into the mainstream, entities setting up news sites that looked kind of legit and then would start to filter in political messages that were again, coming from abroad and were not entirely fact-based, shall we say, and people didn't realize what it was they were reading or where it was coming from. I don't think anybody wants to get their news from a Russian troll farm. And they're going to do different things next time than they did last time. I know the platforms are trying to catch this stuff. They've become a lot more alert to this since 2016, when Facebook was accepting political ads and payment in rubles. So they figured out that's not a good thing. They're not doing that anymore. And I think they are making steps to try and identify better where the information is coming from. We had a rulemaking that I was trying to push forward for years now at the FEC to get better information on the face of any political advertising, so that you would see on the face of an ad, if you're on any platform on the internet, there would be something on the face of the ad that identified where it's coming from. You wouldn't have to click on something to get there. It just would be right there. And I was not getting a lot of engagement from my counterparts in terms of bringing that to a conclusion, which is really disappointing, but obviously we definitely can't do it without a quorum to adopt a rule. So I think that the threat of foreign interference and the threat of disinformation from abroad and at home are my two top concerns.
I want to open up for questions if folks have them. I can keep asking questions, but do we have anyone want to follow with any questions? Yes, and do us a favor, please, if you can just give us your name and tell us, student, faculty, staff, outside visitor, just so that the
Russian troll.
I see we got 1, 2 hands. Go ahead, and then the third one. Please.
Sure, I'm Maggie Taylor. I'm the one now, and I'm about just wondering to what extent enforcement the FCC
Great question, thank you. Anybody can file a complaint with the FEC if they think the law is being violated, and our lawyers will analyze it, and they will present a recommendation memorandum to the commission that says we think you should investigate this, or we think there's nothing to this, we think you should dismiss this, or we can tell already from looking at the complaint and the response that the law has been violated. We ought to go straight into negotiating what we call a conciliation agreement. It's a settlement agreement with the folks on the other side. And then the commission has to vote on that. And it takes 4 votes to do anything. So any complaints that are filed now will be written up by our lawyers, and they will be sitting there waiting for us to consider once we get 4 commissioners again. But we're not going to be, and the complaints that were filed before are being worked on, but right now there's just not a lot we can do to provide clarity at the end of that process. And we have about a little under 300 complaints in-house right now that are in some stage of the process.
My name is Justin Vogel. I'm with 1L. To piggyback off of Maggie's question, during this lack of quorum, is it possible for you to refer these complaints to other agencies, or are they FEC specific?
That's an interesting question. We do have a referral process, but that probably takes 4 votes too. It doesn't happen that often, but I think it probably requires 4 votes.
Because that would be an official action of the commission? So therefore-
Well, we have like a list in the statute, and I have to
Right.
admit I haven't memorized it, but there's a list of actions in the statute that are exercising core functions of the commission that specifically require 4 votes, and I'm pretty sure that's one of them.
Good afternoon. My name is Eileen O'Malley. I'm a Villanova alumna and a current personal mission student here. My question has 2 parts. One is, what is holding up, what is standing in the way of the 3 openings being filled? And my second part of that, basically same question, is it cynical to think that there is a strategy behind those positions not being filled and behind your earlier commissioners leaving? And leaving you without a forum, leaving you, especially since you had said that there seems to be a deregulatory point of view among recent.
My first answer is that you're asking the wrong person. I have no control over that, so you should direct that question to the president. Well, as I said, the process is the president nominates and the Senate confirms, and people of the opposition party are usually recommended by the Democratic leader in the Senate. Why hasn't that happened? Well, I mean, there's a variety of reasons why it might not have happened. The FEC is never at the top of anybody's priority list, I have to say. Historically, we are not the only agency that is missing leaders at the moment. So perhaps it's just part of a broader pattern of how to fill or not fill government positions. It's really hard for me to speculate. It would just be speculation on my part as to whether there is a particular desire to make the FEC particularly non-functional. That I am hoping that is not the case, and I am hoping that we are going to get new commissioners soon, but it's entirely out of my hands. Another great question. As it happens, the law says no more than 3 of one political party, and historically that has meant 3 Ds and 3 Rs. Right now we have 3 commissioners, 1 D, 1 R, 1 I. There is an independent who is sitting in a seat that is considered a Democratic seat and was recommended by the Democratic leader in the Senate for that slot, but plainly people of other parties can be nominated, or of no party.
And that's also part of the challenge is, and to your question as well, that the practice of trying to pair people for nominations, that you have typically a Democrat and a Republican, so that then there's buy-in from the party of the president and the party of the other, the other party, that's something which has been a challenge, and certainly filling slots has been a big challenge in the last decade.
Well, yes, the fact that I'm still there somewhat
Right.
testifies to that, right?
As much as you're working hard for your
I'm-
job, it would be fine if you rotated out because you've done well, but finding new folks to come in is a challenge, and that's a big political, and that's the irony of this,
Yes.
right? This is so
One of
happy-
many ironies.
One of many ironies. All right, let me get one more question. I know we'll wrap up in a moment because I know some people have class to go to. If you're late for class, tell them the dean kept you.
You talked about the professional staff preparing the campaign. Have the professional staff been able to avoid the polarization of the commission? And how are they selected? And are you even able to hire them when you don't have a quorum?
Commissioners are only involved at the high level, in the hiring of the high level staff. The rank and file lawyers that work for us and analyze the complaints are, they're hired by their managers, the general counsel and her managers. And they are all civil servants. It's a nonpartisan professional government job process, posted on USA Jobs, and people interview and go through that. I think it is challenging for the staff to deal with the fact that they can't get clear guidance from their bosses, right? I mean, they're trying to enforce the law and to implement the law and advise us on how to interpret the law, and they're getting mixed signals from their bosses, and I think that makes their job harder. I think their job is to advise us on what they think the law says, not to try and put their finger to the wind and see what would get 4 votes. And I think it's hard for them to avoid that temptation because they want to send up a recommendation that's going to get approved. That's natural, right? And I think that it has been, I think it's been hard for them to avoid that temptation to try and find something that they think might win. And I think that means that they've been kind of paring back on some of their recommendations. And I say this with the greatest of respect for our good and dedicated staff, but it's just human nature, I think. They think, well, maybe if we shade it this way, we'll get it by and we'll get 4 votes, and then we'll be able to at least start an investigation. One of the challenges in recent years has been just starting investigation because my colleagues on the other side of the table have really raised the bar on what it takes to launch an investigation. The statutory standard says you have to have reason to believe that the law has been or is about to be violated. And they have read that in a way that's very different from the way commissioners in the past read it. In the way commissioners in the past basically read it as, okay, can we figure out what's going on here? Is there a reason to investigate this? Or can we tell from the outset there's no there and we should just toss it? But they say, no, I have to actually believe the law has been violated. So I'm not going to vote to start an investigation unless I am presented with evidence that the law has been violated. So that basically puts the onus on the complainant to do the investigation for us and then come forward with in solid evidence before we will start investigating to find the evidence. And I think that's just perverse. But I do, as I said, have a great deal of respect for our staff who I think are doing the best they can in challenging circumstances.
And I would actually ask one last question, since you're talking about the staff. You did describe your path here. What would you recommend for our students who do want to be engaged in some sort of legal work as a career, perhaps in election law, or even just as a side gig?
Well, there are a lot of opportunities to either work at the FEC, work at law firms who practice before the FEC, work in nonprofit organizations that do work that is related to the FEC. There are groups that bring lawsuits against the FEC when they file complaints, and then they bring lawsuits against us when they think we're not giving their complaints their due. And sometimes I am cheering them from the sidelines when they sue the agency, and I actually hope we lose sometimes because I think they're right and the agency has just been blocked from moving forward on things that we should be moving forward on. So I think there's really a lot of different ways that one could get involved in these issues, which I personally think are fascinating. We deal with constitutional issues every single day, which, not a lot of legal jobs can make that claim. And I joke about this a little bit, but I'm only half joking. Every day when I walk out the door, I say to my husband, I'm off to defend democracy. And I really think that's what I do.
Well, that is a perfect place to end. Thank you on behalf of the university and the law school.